Okay, so you just paid $4 and change for a gallon of gas. You pulled in, you swiped, you stood there for 2 minutes watching a number climb, and you drove off about $60 lighter. In August 2026, the national average crossed $4 for the first time in 4 years, and it did it in the middle of summer, which made it the highest August price ever recorded. A year earlier, the same gallon was $3.20. And you know exactly who to blame, because the company's name is on a 60-foot sign lit up over the forecourt. Shell, Exxon, Chevron, BP. Somebody in a glass tower decided you should pay $4, and somewhere a quarterly earnings report is about to look very good. That's the assumption. It's reasonable. It's also almost entirely wrong, and it's wrong in a specific way that is worth understanding, because the mistake is baked into the building you're standing in. Here's the first fact that should bother you. Roughly half of 1% of the fueling outlets in the United States are actually owned by a major oil company. Half of 1%. Out of about 150,000 places to buy gas in this country, the companies whose logos are on the canopies own almost none of them. The sign is a licensing agreement. Only about 31% of American fueling outlets even carry the brand of one of the 5 majors, and carrying it is a contract, not ownership. So if Exxon doesn't own the station, and the person who does own it is not the one setting the price of crude, then the $4 is being split by people you have never thought about. Let's split it. Here's the turn. Gasoline isn't priced by anyone. It's assembled, in 4 pieces, by 4 groups who mostly never speak to each other. The Energy Information Administration, which is the federal agency that actually counts this, breaks every gallon into the same 4 components. In May 2026, they landed like this. Crude oil, 52%. Refining, 22%. Distribution and marketing, 15%. Taxes, 12%. Sit with those numbers for a second, because the shape of them is the whole story. More than half of what you paid was decided before the fuel was fuel. About $1.08 went to a government. And the entire business of moving it, storing it, branding it, and handing it to you, the part with the logo and the canopy and the person behind the counter, is 15 cents on the dollar before anybody's costs come out. By the end of this, you'll know who takes each of those 4 pieces, why the station keeps roughly 3 cents of your $4, why the same gallon costs more than twice as much in Amsterdam and about 1 cent in Caracas, and why the tax on it hasn't changed since 1993. One more thing about those 4 numbers. They are not fixed. 2 months earlier, in March 2026, the same agency had the split at 57% crude, 21% refining, 14% taxes, and 8% distribution. The pieces breathe. Crude swells and squeezes everything else, refining margin spikes and collapses with the maintenance calendar, and the tax line barely moves because a legislature has to vote to move it. So when somebody blames one villain, ask which of the 4 they mean and in which month. Start where the money starts, underground and not in America. 52% of your gallon is crude oil, and the price of crude is not an American number. Oil trades on a world market. A barrel is 42 gallons, and through the summer of 2026 crude has been running in the $80 to $90 range, which puts something over $2 of raw material into every gallon before a single thing is done to it. That price is set by supply, demand, and fear. And 2026 has been a year of fear. Volatility around the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow stretch of water that a large share of the world's seaborne oil has to pass through, has been the single biggest driver. Pump prices climbed sharply after American military operations against Iran at the end of February. None of that has anything to do with your station, your state, or your car. This is the part people get wrong when they see an oil company's profits. Yes, a major makes more money when crude is expensive, but it makes that money out of the ground, thousands of miles from the forecourt. The gallon in your tank did not get expensive because a retailer decided to charge more. It got expensive because the commodity underneath it repriced, globally, in a week. It has happened before, harder. The all-time record for the American national average is $5.01, set on June the 14th, 2022. Before that year, the country had not seen a $4 average since 2008. 3 times in 18 years, the same mechanism has done the same thing, and each time the argument has been about gas stations rather than about barrels. And when the commodity moves, it moves for everybody at once. That is why every station in your town changed its sign on the same afternoon. The second piece is refining, and in May 2026, it was 22% of the pump price. Crude oil is useless in a car. It has to be heated, separated, cracked, and blended into gasoline that meets the specification for the season and the state. That work happens in a shrinking number of very large, very old plants. As of the start of 2026, the United States had 130 operable refineries, 2 fewer than the year before. Total capacity was 18.2 million barrels a day, down about 250,000 barrels a day, roughly 1% in a single year. 2 closures did most of it. LyondellBasell shut its Houston refinery in March 2025, about 264,000 barrels a day. Phillips 66 closed its Los Angeles refinery in October 2025, about 139,000. That is the structural fact underneath American gas prices that almost nobody mentions. Demand is flat to falling. Capacity is falling faster. And refining is a business with almost no slack in it. So when one plant goes down for maintenance in the wrong month, the regional price of gasoline moves in days. Refining margin is also the most volatile of the 4 pieces. It was 22% in May. In other months, it has run half that. When you hear that gas prices spiked for no reason, this is usually the reason. And unlike crude, this piece has a geography. Gasoline does not travel well or far. It moves by pipeline and truck inside regional markets, which is why a fire at one plant can add 30 cents in one state and nothing at all 2 states over. The crude is global, the refinery is regional, and the next piece is local. The third piece, distribution and marketing, was 15%. 15 cents of every dollar to move the fuel from the refinery gate to your tank. That's pipelines, terminals, tanker trucks, storage, the brand license, and the station itself. And here's where the story you assumed falls apart completely. Take the retailer's own numbers. In 2025, the average gross margin on a gallon of fuel in the United States ran around 35 to 40 cents. That sounds enormous. It is not what the station keeps. Card fees come out first. Credit and debit interchange on fuel hit a record $21.3 billion in 2025, roughly 8.5 cents on every gallon sold. That is a fifth to a quarter of the gross margin gone to a payment network. Then the station has to run. Wages, lights, the canopy, the pumps, the tanks. The industry's own arithmetic puts operating expense near 6 cents a gallon, equipment amortization near 2, and shrinkage around 1. Add it up, and the net margin on a gallon of gasoline lands somewhere around 10 to 15 cents. Call it 13. 13 cents on a $4 sale, about 3%. And notice what that fee does at $4. Interchange is charged on the size of the sale, not the size of the sales profit. So when crude spikes and the pump price climbs, the payment network's take climbs with it automatically, while the retailer's cents per gallon does not. High prices are the one part of this chain where a company that never touches the fuel earns more for doing nothing different. The name on the sign gets a licensing fee. The person who owns the building gets 3 cents, which raises an obvious question. Why would anyone run a gas station? The answer is that a gas station is not a gas business. It is a small shop with a very expensive sign out front. For American convenience stores, fuel was about 65% of the money coming through the door in 2025, and only about 39% of the gross profit. 2/3 of the revenue produces a bit more than 1/3 of the earnings. The rest comes from inside: the coffee, the fountain drink, the roller grill, the cigarettes, the lottery ticket. The gasoline is not the product. The gasoline is the reason you stopped. And these are mostly not corporations. Roughly 57% of the 150,000 fuel-selling convenience stores in America are single-store operations, owned by the person standing in them. Flying a major's brand means buying that company's fuel at that company's wholesale price, in that company's price zone. Zone pricing is worth knowing about. A supplier sets its wholesale price by where the station is, not by what the fuel cost, so 2 stations 20 minutes apart can pay different prices for identical gasoline out of the same terminal. And then there is the thing every driver has noticed and assumed was theft. prices shoot up fast and drift down slowly. Economists have a name for it. Rockets and feathers, from a 1991 study of British petrol prices by Robert Bacon, tested on American data ever since, notably by Severin Borenstein at Berkeley, the finding holds. Retail prices chase a cost increase up almost immediately and take much longer to follow a decrease down. The usual explanation is not a conspiracy. Drivers shop hard when prices are rising and stop looking when they are falling, so the competitive pressure disappears on the way down. The fourth piece is the one that is entirely a choice: taxes. 12% of the May 2026 pump price. The federal gasoline tax is 18.4 cents a gallon. 18.3 of that goes to the Highway Trust Fund, and 1/10 cent goes to a fund for leaking underground storage tanks. That number has not changed since 1993. It is not indexed to inflation. Adjust it for the cost of living since 1993, and it is worth well under half of what Congress set, while the roads and bridges it pays for got more expensive every single year. States fill the gap. As of January 2026, the average state adds about 33.3 cents. So the typical American gallon carries roughly 52 cents of tax. The spread between states is enormous. In California, drivers pay about 89 cents a gallon in total taxes, a 61-cent state excise tax, around 10 cents of sales tax and fees, plus the federal 18. In Alaska, the state tax is 8.95 cents, and the all-in total is about 27 cents. Same fuel, 62 cents apart, before anything else. And in 2026, with prices at record August highs, Washington did what Washington does. Multiple bills appeared to suspend the federal tax for the summer. Senators Blumenthal and Kelly filed one, Senator Hawley filed another, Representative Pappas filed a third. A 4-month holiday would cost the Highway Trust Fund roughly $11.5 billion. None of them became law. No federal gas tax suspension ever has. For a case study in what all four pieces do when they collide, look at California. California has the highest fuel taxes in the country, its own uniquely clean-burning blend that almost nobody outside the state refines, and the highest pump prices on the mainland. After the price spikes of 2022, the state decided the refiners were the problem. In March 2023, Governor Gavin Newsom signed SBX 1-2, the Gas Price Gouging and Transparency Law. It took effect that June. It forced refiners to hand over detailed cost and margin data, created an independent division inside the California Energy Commission to watch the petroleum market for manipulation, and, at its center, gave regulators the power to set a maximum gross refining margin and to penalize any refiner who went over it. That cap was the whole point. It has never been switched on. Regulators later proposed shelving it for 5 years, out to 2029. Meanwhile, the refineries left. Phillips 66 closed its Los Angeles plant in October 2025. Valero announced it would shut its Benicia refinery, 145,000 barrels a day, in April 2026. Between them, a large share of the capacity that makes California's special blend. So the state with the strictest oversight and the highest taxes now has fewer places to make the only fuel its cars are allowed to burn. Which is the lesson of the whole gallon. You can regulate the margin, but the price is a supply chain, and supply chains leave. And California is not an exception to the 4-piece split. It is the same 4 pieces, with the tax line doubled and the refining line pinched by a fuel specification only a handful of plants can produce. Now take your $4 gallon abroad, because this is where the American number finally makes sense. Crude oil is a world price. The refinery in Rotterdam pays roughly what the refinery in Texas pays. So if the same barrel costs the same everywhere, the pump price should be roughly the same everywhere. It isn't close. Across the European Union, taxes are, on average, 52.1% of the price of petrol. In the United Kingdom, fuel duty plus value-added tax is about 57%. Germany, 54.5%. The Netherlands, around 55%, and its excise duty alone is about 84.5 euro cents a liter, which is roughly $3.76 on a US gallon. Read that again? The Dutch fuel duty by itself is more than 7 times the entire American tax burden, federal and state combined. Now go the other way. In Venezuela, gasoline is subsidized down to about 1 cent a liter. In Iran, about 36 cents a liter. Those governments sit on the oil and sell it to their own citizens below what the world would pay, because cheap fuel buys political quiet. So here is the actual answer. American gasoline is not cheap because American oil is cheap, or because American refiners are generous, or because your station is kind. It is cheap because the United States is one of the only rich countries that has decided not to tax it, 12%, against a European average of 52%. Every country in that comparison buys the same commodity at the same world price. What changes at the pump is entirely what each government decided to add on top of it, or take off underneath it. So here is the gallon, itemized. $2 and change went to whoever pulled the oil out of the ground, at a price set by a market you cannot see and a strait you will never sail through. Roughly 90 cents went to one of 130 aging refineries, 2 fewer than last year. About 50 cents went to a federal tax frozen in 1993 and a state tax that depends entirely on which side of a line you were driving on. And about 13 cents, 3%, went to the person who owns the building, sells you the coffee, pays the card fee, and gets blamed for all of it. The name on the canopy is a brand license. The owner is usually one guy with one store. The price on the sign was mostly written by crude oil 3 weeks ago and by a legislature 30 years ago. That is why yelling at the cashier has never once moved the number. There's a reason this is the one price in American life everybody can recite from memory. It is posted in numbers 3 feet tall on every corner. It updates daily, and it is the only expense you are forced to watch tick upward in real time while standing still. But a price you can see is not a price you can trace. $4 looks like one decision by one company. It is 4 decisions, made by an oil market, a refinery, a legislature, and a payment network, then handed to somebody with a mop who has to explain it to you. You are not buying gasoline. You are buying a barrel of oil, a refinery slot, a truck, a tank, a permit, and a highway. The station just holds the hose.